All right, everybody. Good to see everybody. Talk about the New England colonies today. The New England colonies were started by Puritans who were looking to come to the Americas to escape persecution. You're looking at this and you're like, okay, I am being persecuted because of my religion. So I got to get out of here in some way. And they knew that they could get to the Americas and practice their own religion. In fact, they wanted to get here so they could set up a separate society that was completely based on their religion. They had to escape the Church of England, which they thought was religion light, essentially. But they were Calvinists. They believed in predestination, which means that God has already predestined, that He's already determined whether or not you were going to hell or heaven. So they were constantly looking for these signs in their lives, their own personal lives, that God had chosen, that showed that God had chosen them for entrance into heaven. And the people that were destined for heaven were called the elect. So if you were part of the elect, you were already chosen by God to go to heaven. So you could say, oh, my crop came in and it was really good this time around. Or I found a penny on the street, or I found some money, or something good happened to me. This was a sign that God liked you, that God favored you, that you were going to heaven. They hated the Church of England. And again, they sought to, then this was one of the reasons why they came to the Americas, because they had to get out and create their own society apart from the Church of England. So they were like, well, we as a society, we have people who are part of the elect, and those who aren't part of the elect aren't allowed into our society. And the Church of England, they'll just let anybody in. They don't believe in predestination. They'll let people who are damned come into their society, and we have to prevent that. So they wanted to break away. They wanted to create their own sort of utopian type of society. They set out for the Americas. They did not have a charter, and they arrived 1620 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They drafted this, one of the first sort of, I guess you could call it a constitution, but the Mayflower Compact, the design was to set up an agreement between all the people that would define how the society was going to run. This was all based on the people and what was good for the society as a whole. And everybody basically had to buy in to what the society was going to be. So it wasn't just about one person laying down the law. This wasn't a monarchy. This wasn't a dictatorship in any way, shape, or form. This was one of the first democratic pieces of paper. This was one of the very first democratic documents promoting democracy. So, and again, the thing that makes these colonies so unique is that they all sort of developed their own form of government apart from Great Britain that would sort of define them and sort of separate each one. And this would eventually turn into the federal system that the United States is today. Every single state has its own particular laws or rules. We do not... There's a train of thought and sort of this legacy from the colonial system, the British colonial system, that every single area should be able to control themselves to a certain degree. We don't believe in central government. We don't believe, or a strong central government. We don't believe in having one rule for all the states or all the regions or all the cities or whatever. We very much believe in local control. And from the very beginning, this comes from the specific government Virginia set up. This comes from the specific government the Puritans set up in Massachusetts. This comes from the Catholic haven. This whole the government the Catholics set up in Maryland. This came from William Penn and the government he set up in Pennsylvania. And again, this was very much like Virginia in the fact that it was very difficult to survive when they first arrived. Out of 102 pilgrims, only 44 survived. But this would eventually become a very successful, very profitable colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony. So these Puritans that came were non-separatists, and they settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. 1629, more came, and as they became more successful, like I said, it would grow more and more and more. 20,000 coming to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the next 20 years. Or, I'm sorry, the next 10 years. This was known as the quote-unquote Great Migration, which there are several great migrations in American history. We'll tackle the other two much, much later on, when African Americans would migrate from the south to the north after the First and Second World Wars. But the the Great Migration, the first one that we'll encounter in this class, is a result of many Puritans coming from England to Massachusetts. John Winthrop was the first governor of Massachusetts. He wanted to build, quote-unquote, a shining city on a hill, which to him was a religious utopia. It was a model religious society promised by God. And the shining city on a hill would kind of come back into vogue. This rhetoric would come back into vogue in the 1980s, when I believe President Reagan used the same rhetoric, same phrase, a shining city on a hill, that's what America is supposed to be. And America is a shining city on a hill. And America is exceptional. And that's exactly what Winthrop sought to create. Although I doubt America in the 21st century, or even America in the 1980s, is anything Winthrop could have possibly conceived of. But we look at how people made money in the South. I mean, that was through plantations and tobacco and eventually cotton. In Massachusetts, it was all about fur trading, fishing, and shipbuilding. They did not have the same climate. They did not have the same sort of land. They didn't have arable land that the southern colonies had. So these were the industries that thrived in Massachusetts and the Northeast, in what they called New England. Also, you had the Protestant ethic. This was sort of the Protestant work ethic. And this would kind of be a distinct value of American culture. This was a serious commitment to work. Work was important to people. If you weren't working, it meant you weren't contributing to society, which meant God was not happy. You were not doing your due duty to society and not doing your due duty to God. Therefore, that could mean God could send you straight to hell. Life was very serious. You had to fulfill your duty as a human in this particular society. Again, you had to be faithful to God. And hell was a real thing. It was a very real possibility if you did not fulfill your responsibilities, like I said. Anne Hutchinson was one who came along and challenged that way of thinking. She thought she was part of the elect. And because she said to herself, oh, I'm part of the elect, therefore I don't have to obey the law. I can do whatever I want because I'm going to heaven no matter what. And she said that God came and talked to her and told her this. She said that God was just basically said that she was going to heaven. And the rest of society thought that she was completely nuts and evil. They called her a heretic, and she was kicked out of the society. They kicked her out. She went to Rhode Island, and she ended up living in New York, where she was killed by Indians. And to the rest of the society, the rest of the Puritans, this was evidence that she was not part of the elect, that God was real, that she disobeyed what she was supposed to do. She did not fulfill her role in society, therefore God took her life. And, like Winthrop says here, her death was God's will. And of course, the Puritans had major conflicts with the natives. This is another thing they had in common with the southern colonies. The Pequot War, King Philip's War. These were major wars. You might want to read a little bit more about those in your textbook, or I might talk about them a little bit more in depth here. But these were severe clashes, and the Puritans were extremely brutal, harsh individuals. They didn't care about getting the Indians to convert to Christianity. What they cared about was destroying the Indians and taking their resources, or competition for resources. So it was like live and let live, unless, oh, well, we're fighting over goods and resources, and in that case, we're going to kill you. King Philip's War. There was a guy named the leader of the uh, the Indian tribe was a guy named Metacom. Metacom, also known as King Philip, organized this alliance of Native American groups and attacked the English. The Puritans completely destroyed the Native Americans. And Metacom's wife and son were sold into slavery. Metacom was drawn and quartered. I should say Metacom's wife and son were sold into slavery. He himself was drawn and quartered, which, if you don't know what drawing and quartering is, they tie a human being up to 4 horses by the limbs. So you've got each arm tied up to a different horse, each leg tied up to separate horses, and the horses are all pointed in different directions. The horses are whipped. The horses run in different directions, thereby pulling off the arms and legs of the individual. His head was cut off. They put his head in the town square. So again, the Puritans, just because they were a religious society, doesn't mean that they were not immune to extreme brutality. So again, this sort of conflict with the natives was something that they definitely had in common with the southern plantation colonies. Anyway, that's the last thing that I'm going to say today. I kept it down around 11 minutes. That was good. I will see you guys later. Oh, by the way, keep in mind, I want you to keep in mind the similarities and differences between the New England colonies, which we just talked about, and the southern colonies. I'll catch you cats on the flip-flop.